I'm Rick Weatherald, elite coach with Athletes on Track and pro mountain biker for the Subaru Sun and Ski race team. The second round of the Sun and Ski TMBRA State Series is on the rocky trails of Comfort, Texas. Let's take a look at a few keys to setting up your bike to go fast at Comfort. Now the trails at Comfort are pretty rocky, and as such you don't want to be bringing some super light, super thin racing tires. So tires like a Schwalbe Racing Ralph, or like I've got here, a Specialized S-Works Renegade tire. I'll probably be leaving that at home because the sidewalls are real thin, and just like the ground here, the ground at Comfort's got some pretty sharp, ragged edge rocks that can really eat up a tire quickly. So that's the first important thing that you want to know about setting up your tires for Comfort. Now if you have a choice of tires, like if you have a quiver of tires that you change from race to race, like I said, this would be a good one to choose the one that has a little bit heavier tire, that has a little bit thicker sidewall. And then for tread, you don't need anything real aggressive, because while Comfort is real rocky, it's not something that lends itself to having a real beefy tire. You still want something that rolls fast. This is still a cross-country race. So for example, what I'll be running in Comfort is the front tire here. I have a Specialized Fast Track, and this is the Fast Track Control. It's not the S-Works tire. It's got a little bit thicker sidewall, a little bit heavier to resist cuts a little bit more. I'll probably run something like a Kenda Small Block 8 on the back, but any of the low profile racing treads will be good. If you're running the same tire front and back, that's fine. Just like I said, the biggest thing I recommend is that you're not running a super lightweight, very thin tire. And as far as pressure, it would be great, being that it's a rough course, that you could drop the pressure a lot to make the ride a lot more comfortable. But like I was talking about before, if you drop the pressure real low to even maybe your normal running pressure, you're just asking for a pinch flat, even with tubeless. So take your normal pressure that you're running, and I would up it, especially in the rear, by about 2 or 3 psi. For me, that's going to end up looking like about 25 psi in the front and 27, 28 in the back, maybe even more depending on how much the erosion has exposed more rocks. I'll check that out in practice. Now as far as adding sealant in your tires, you can let the air out, break the bead, and pour it in. The way I like to do it is, most of you, if you're with your tubeless setups, you should have a removable core on your Presta valve here. You can use an injector. There's some companies that sell an injector specially made. I actually just take an injector made to feed medication to horses. Then I have a little piece of tube that I got at the hardware store, and it fits right on the Presta valve, so I can inject the sealant right in there. On the subject of sealant, I've started recently using a new brand of sealant called Orange Seal. For about 10 years I was using the Stan's no tube stuff, just like everybody else was using, and I didn't really think anybody made anything better. And just recently there's this company Orange Seal that came out, and I really like their stuff. It seems like they seal a little bit better than Stan's, but the big thing I like about it is that it stays liquid in the tire 2 or 3 times longer than the Stan's stuff. So that just means I'm refilling the tires less often throughout the season. Whereas before I was making a habit of checking the tires probably every 2 weeks for race season. Now I'm habitual about it. I'll check it once a month, but I rarely have to add, maybe once every 3 months, and I don't add that much sealant to my tires. I run on the race wheels, I run it pretty light. So check out that company called Orange Seal. They're out of Austin, and they're still small, but you can find them and order the stuff online. And most of the Texas bike shops should be carrying them by now, so look for that stuff. Now the next thing to talk about is suspension. So I'll talk about the fork first, and then we'll move on to the rear suspension second. So pretty much everybody's going to have a suspension fork. Which brand you have, I'm not really partial to any of the brands. They all work really well. Nowadays suspension's just working good. So let's talk about the different adjustments. The first one, the main one, as far as preload, that's just, most of you are going to have an air preload. I wouldn't change your air pressure any different than normal. You will bottom out your fork in Comfort. There are a few drops, you can just bank on that. So if your fork bottoms out every now and then, it's not that big of a deal. Set your suspension up with some normal pressure. Now, different people's forks will have different amounts of adjustment on them, so we'll just go through all the possible adjustments that you could have. The first main one is compression adjustment. Most of the time you'll have a compression adjuster on the top of your right crown. This fork doesn't have that there. Sometimes they're on the bottom. So if you have a compression adjustment, I would leave that where you would normally run it, if not just slow it down just a little bit. And what that'll do is it'll still leave it sensitive for the small bumps, but the big hits won't blow through the stroke quite as quickly. So now the other one that some people have down on the bottom, and some people, mine is up here on the top, is a rebound adjustment. Now for comfort, I would definitely slow down the rebound a little bit. The number of hard hits that there are when you're deep in the stroke, the rebound, if you slow it down, it'll make the big hit seem just a little bit less harsh because the fork won't come springing back at you as quick. So a lot of people don't really know what the rebound and compression dampers actually do. So a quick analogy, there's a real simplified version of the way a rebound and compression circuit works. So most forks on the left leg, you have an air preload, and that just, all that is how hard that is to push down. And then the other leg, you'll have a compression circuit. So they're really complicated and hard to explain, but the really simplified version is that you have a chamber full of hydraulic oil, which is non-compressible. There's a piston at the top. When the fork compresses, that piston pushes all the hydraulic fluid through a small hole in the bottom. And then when it comes back up, this air spring is pushing you back up, the piston has to suck all that fluid back through that small hole. So compression adjustment is just basically how big that hole is. If you make the hole smaller, it can't go through quite as fast. So the fork may feel the same 100 PSI of preload, but when you hit something at high speed, it's going to up the resistance a little bit because you can't force all the oil through a little hole. The rebound's the same way. If it springs back real fast, the rebound circuit can resist that a little bit because it's got to suck all that hydraulic fluid back through a hole. So if you're slowing down the compression circuit, you're basically making that hole smaller, and it's slower for all the oil to move through there. So that's how a rebound and compression circuit works. So like I said, compression, I'd say about the same, maybe a little bit slower than normal, and run your rebound 1 or 2 clicks slower than normal, definitely. So obviously I have a hardtail here, not a full suspension, but for this conversation we'll pretend that I have a full suspension so I can talk about rear suspension for a second. So just like the front suspension, you're gonna bottom out your rear suspension at comfort. It doesn't matter how much you up it, and I just wouldn't worry about it. If you're gonna bottom out every once in a while, it's not that big of a deal. So that being said, you don't wanna up your pressure too much because there are a bunch of places where you're going up, say you were going up a climb like this that's real rough and choppy, and if you've got the suspension, you want to make it work for you. So that's when it's going to make a big difference, is going up the hill and on the flats when you're having to sit down pedaling and negotiate some technical climbs. On the downhill, you will blow through the stroke a little bit faster, and that's fine because you have maybe 3, maybe 4, every once in a while somebody will have 5 inches of travel on their race bike. Compare that to how much suspension you have from your legs. You know, you have maybe a foot of suspension on your body from your legs. So when you're descending and standing up, a lot of your suspension is going to come from your legs. You don't have to worry about what it's doing on the downhill. When you're climbing, you need to be on the seat or close to it to be able to negotiate the technical climbs, and that's when you want your suspension working for you, and that's when you're not going to bottom out as much. So set your suspension up based on the flats and the climbs, and don't worry about the downhills. As far as compression and rebound, same as before. I would actually leave the compression the same, and then rebound I would slow down 1 or 2 clicks if you've got that adjustment. Now some of you guys may have a pedal platform, some Fox shocks, and the Specialized have the brain fade on them. With those, I would not run them too firm because you want the suspension to be really active at comfort. There's a few smooth places where, yeah, it'd be nice for your suspension to be a little bit more firm and locked out, but there's so many more really choppy sections that you'll really benefit from a full open suspension circuit that you'll back off. I have a brain adjustment on this fork here, and I will be backing way off on the platform of it. Now as far as other things you want to do special for your bike, it's still a cross-country race. The distances should be about the same as normal, and it's not going to be abnormally hot. In fact, for the Texas series, you consider it cool even. So I'll be racing with 1 bottle cage. Most of you guys will only go through the feed zone once, if at all. Actually, a lot of the Cat 2s and 3s won't hit a feed zone at all. I still believe that given your race times and that it won't be that hot out, if you start hydrated, 1 full bottle should be enough. I'm a big advocate of using bottles instead of Camelbacks. If you're not comfortable reaching down for a bottle in most places on a trail, practice to where you can, because that's a performance advantage to not have the Camelback on your back. So 1 bottle cage should do. If your bike has a spot for 2 and you think you might use it, it's not going to hurt to carry a little bit of extra water, so go ahead and do that if you're not sure. But I don't think it's going to be hot enough to be burning through more than 1 bottle on a normal length race. Again, you want to make sure before the race, I'd say Thursday or Friday, so you're not leaving it till the last minute, check your seal in your tires. the sealant can make a huge difference. There's a lot of times that if you have sealant in your tires, you've punctured and you don't even know it. You can carry a little air canister with you, so if you do get a puncture, you've got maybe a 50-50 chance that it seals, and you can just hit it with some air and keep racing. You don't have to go and throw a tube in there. That being said, flats are common at Comfort because it is so rocky. I would really advise against racing without a tube. I like to keep my stuff mounted to my seat post because it keeps the weight off of my body for when I have to stand up and sit down, stand up, sit down over all the rough stuff, which a mountain bike race, you're standing up and sitting down every 2 seconds. So if you keep the weight of the tube and the CO2 on your bike instead of on your body, it's just a little bit less that you have to be lifting up and down. Now, we'll address one skill associated with riding the Comfort course, and like I was talking about before, Comfort is really marked by a lot of real technical climbs. The climbs aren't super long, but they're very tough because of the technical nature of them, especially the top out. A lot of them you'll have a pretty steep, smooth part into a little technical aspect at the top. And so I'm not out there to show you exactly one section or another that's tough, but you will see a bunch of them. We'll talk about how to approach those right now. So the key to making sure you can do that is being able to track stand. If you can't track stand reliably, I would try to work on it all this week, get as good as you can at it, practice in your tennis shoes first, and because if you can track stand, that helps your slow speed balance, and that's really what you need to clear these climbs. So we'll pretend, for comparison's sake here, let's pretend for a second that this is one of the technical top outs on the Comfort course. You'd be coming into it on a steep climb, you'd already be tapped out, your heart rate will be up, and you'll be in a low gear already. You won't have much momentum. So there'll be a little ledge at the top. Sometimes there's 2 ledges or something to negotiate towards the top. Now the key, like I said, if you're able to track stand, you can come into it, and when you get up here, you might get stopped up for a second, but you can push your weight forward and thrust the bike forward and be able to get it going again. So the way you want to break down the climb is, in practice, look at it and see the parts where you're going to have traction, where you can pedal hard, and the places where you won't have traction and you've got to rely on the momentum. Now these may change every foot or two, and you really want to dissect that, especially towards the top of a climb. So coming into it, you want to pick a gear that's low enough to be able to accelerate from almost a dead stop, but you don't want to be too low. If you're too low, you can put a lot of torque to the back wheel and lose traction real easy. If you're losing traction, try 1 gear higher, and that can help you keep the traction because you don't have as much torque going to the back wheel. So come in a pretty low gear, but not too low, and decide where you have traction, hit the gas hard there, and then get the bike real light for the parts that don't have traction. So what I mean by that is, say I have traction right here, I'm going to be hitting the gas hard, but I can't have traction while I'm lifting the back wheel up over this ledge. So I'll be pedaling hard up until about here, and then I'm going to use my body weight and lifting the back end up to thrust the bike over. Now at this point right here, this is a dry rock, I have traction again. And so I'd hit the gas again hard for 1 pedal stroke to get over to this next ledge. So there's a bunch of places like that where there's 2 ledges in a row, and those can really get people. Now, the other thing you want to know is plan in advance. If you kept trying a section over and over and you were less than, say, 50% at hitting it in practice, it's almost certain that you're not going to make it in a race when you're tired and there's traffic around you. Plan ahead, know when you're coming into this section, and dismount early. Don't dismount when you hit the rock that you can't clear. You want to be dismounted while you're still moving so that you don't stop. We talked about that in the WARDA video, and I showed there how efficient you can be with running. You can go just as fast as somebody that's riding it if you can do a running mount and dismount. So just know in advance the sections that you're going to walk, and if you're coming into somewhere in traffic, know that something that you rode in practice, you may not be able to ride when you're in traffic. So just plan early, get off the bike, run, get back on when you're back on the flat, and go. Alright, so hopefully this gives you something to think about coming up to race weekend in Comfort. If you've got any questions before then, my email's here on the bottom of the screen. You're welcome to send me some questions via email, and if not, I'll see you guys at the races.